Thousands of Salvadorans commemorated the 30th anniversary of the end of the civil war while protesting what they see as attempts by President Nayib Bukele to raise the 1992 peace accords. The family of Martin Luther King Jr. led a peace march on Monday, calling for the passage of voting rights reform legislation currently stalled in the United States Senate. Palestinians protested in occupied East Jerusalem over a new eviction in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. We begin in El Salvador, where thousands of people commemorated the 30th anniversary of the end of the civil war on Monday, while denouncing what they claim are attempts by the President Nayib Bukele to raise the peace accords that established the foundations of the country's democracy. President Bukele on Sunday sanctioned a decree to honor victims of the civil war that the opposition considers a delegitimization of the peace accords that signaled an end to the conflict 30 years ago. The decree approves the move to commemorate the National Day of the Victims of the Armed Conflict on January 16th, after the ruling party, which holds a majority in the Legislative Assembly, repealed a decree that established the date as the National Day of Peace. Lawmakers argued that the peace accords represented the signing of a pact by a small circle of power, which for years has been a symbol of injustice and social exclusion. But opponents of Bukele, who became president outside the traditional parties, accused him of wanting to erase the agreements and politically wipe out the two parties that signed the peace accords.
History cannot be erased with a decree this January 16th. We celebrate the signing of the peace accords that put an end to the 12-year-long armed conflict in a fratricidal war in which Salvadorans killed Salvadorans. There was blood and there was loss of human lives, of families. That is why we see this square crowded, because people do not want to forget their history. A people that forget its history is forced to repeat it, and that is what we do not want. We do not want the police, the army, and other institutions to be manipulated to persecute the opponents of the regime. We know that the peace accords greatly advanced democracy in our country, and that is why he wants to discredit the peace accords. That is why we, as Salvadoran people, are taking to the streets, because the president and his government do not want to commemorate this date. We are going to do it, and on top of that, we are going to protest against the dictatorship.
As a result of the peace accords, many institutions were also created, which is why we now have democracy, or what is left of democracy in our country.
Now we move on to other topics. Addressing the virtual World Economic Forum this Monday, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned of the need to vaccinate the whole world in order to end the COVID-19 pandemic.
Have demonstrated a simple but brutal truth. If we leave anyone behind, in the end, we leave everyone behind. If we fail to vaccinate every person, we give rise to new variants that spread across borders and bring daily life and economies to a grinding halt. This coming year, I urge you to focus on three urgent areas. First, we need to confront the pandemic with equity and fairness. Last fall, the World Health Organization unveiled a strategy to vaccinate 40% of people in all countries by the end of last year and 70% by the middle of this year. We are nowhere near these targets.
And the UN Secretary General also stressed the need to reform the global financial system and support developing countries.
Now, at the core of these failures is a global inability to support developing countries in their hour of need, and also a problem of governance for international different systems. Without immediate action to support developing countries, inequalities and poverty will deepen. And this will result in more social unrest and more violence. Second, we need to reform the global financial system in a way that it can work for all countries without being biased. At this critical moment, we are setting in stone a lopsided recovery. More than 8 out of 10 recovery dollars are being spent in developed countries. Low-income countries are at a huge disadvantage.
The International Labour Organization has warned it could take years for employment levels to reach pre-pandemic levels, while noting the need to work to tackle increased inequality.
The main finding of our report is that the labour market recovery from the COVID-19 crisis is incomplete, it is fragile and it's uneven. So we expect in 2022 that the number of hours actually worked in the global economy will still be considerably below pre-pandemic level, and that represents effectively the loss of 52 million full-time job equivalents. So we're not even back to the starting point. The rich world, Europe and North America, is getting back to pre-pandemic levels more quickly. Some regions are doing less well. And the uncertainty comes from the fact that we are facing inflationary pressures, supply chain blockages, which means, well, things might continue to improve, but they could also go quite badly wrong as well. What we need to see is a genuine common international effort to pull the world forward from this pandemic. If each country goes its own way, I fear that the great divergence is only going to get worse rather than better. And that's really important in a world which is already suffering, I think, the stresses and strains of increased inequalities.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The family of Martin Luther King Jr. led a peace march on Monday morning across Washington, D.C.'s new Frederick Douglass Bridge, calling for the passage of voting rights reform legislation currently stalled in the United States Senate. King's eldest son, Martin Luther King III, and his wife, Andrea Waters King, were joined by other civil rights leaders and also marchers to urge the Senate to act on voting rights. Last week, President Joe Biden saw his voting rights legislation run aground when Democratic Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona announced her opposition to changing Senate rules to allow the bill to pass by a simple majority. Saturday will have been the 93rd birthday of Reverend and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who was just 39 when he was assassinated in 1968, while helping sanitation workers strike for better pay and the workplace safety in Memphis, Tennessee.
Mr. President, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, members of the Senate, pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act now. If you can deliver an infrastructure bill for bridges, you can deliver voting rights for Americans. If you do not, there's no bridge in this nation.
And Russia has reiterated his demands that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization halt its expansion eastward, while noting it will not wait indefinitely for a Western response. According to presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, the deployment of NATO forces and weapons near Russia's borders poses a security threat that must be addressed immediately. At a news conference on Friday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed that the United States has been driven by arrogance and has aggravated tensions in violation of its obligations and common sense. Last week, negotiations in Geneva and a related NATO-Russia meeting in Brussels were held amid the significant tensions over Ukraine, while little progress has been reported. And Russian authorities again dismissed the United States' accusations of an alleged operation by the Kremlin to invade Ukraine. Prime Minister Sergei Lavrov pointed out that Washington spread false information about an alleged false flag attack on the Russian-speaking population in Donbass as an excuse for an occupation in Ukraine. Lavrov stated that what happened in Ukraine in 2014 was not provoked by Russia, but a coup supported and organized by the United States. Moscow has repeatedly ruled out an invasion of the neighboring country and stressed that the tensions stem from the military build-up by Ukraine with the support of NATO. And reports have revealed the United States Central Intelligence Agency has been overseeing a secret training program for Ukrainian Special Operations Forces and intelligence operatives since 2015. The revelations cite 5 former intelligence and national security officials. The U.S. officials said the intelligence agency has been supervising the covert training program in preparation for a potential conflict with Russia. The mission has allegedly been underway since 2014, and the training program is based on an undisclosed facility in the southern U.S. The military boot camp has included exercises in firearms, camouflage techniques, and land navigation. The president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, issued a decree dismissing the first deputy head of the National Security Committee on Monday. The presidential press service reported to move to dismiss Samat Bish, the nephew of the former president Nursultan Nazarbayev, from the post. On January 8th, Kazakhstan Special Services detained the former chair of the National Security Committee, Karim Mazimov, accused of high treason in the wake of violent destabilization attempts that rocked the Central Asian nation in early January. On January 13th, the ex-deputy chairman of the National Security Committee, head of the Special Task Service, and the former deputy chairman of the National Security Committee were also detained. China announced on Monday that its borders with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has reopened for freight train trade, some 2 years after it was chartered because of the coronavirus pandemic. A close economic ally, China accounts for more than 90% of the sanctioned country's bilateral trade.
Due to the impact of the pandemic, rail traffic between China and the DPRK had been suspended for some time. Now, freight trains carrying goods between Dandong and the DPRK have resumed operation after the friendly negotiation between the two countries. This work will be conducted in accordance with pandemic prevention measures to boost the normal trade between China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Chinese President Xi Jinping called on countries to pool strength to overcome difficulties and challenges while addressing the World Economic Forum during its virtual session on Monday.
We must add wings to the tiger and act with the courage and strength of the tiger to overcome all obstacles on our way forward. We must do everything necessary to clear the shadow of the pandemic and boost economic and social recovery and development, so that the sunshine of hope may light up the future of humanity. The world today is undergoing major changes unseen in a century. These changes, not limited to a particular moment, event, country, or region, represent the profound and sweeping changes of our times. Notwithstanding all vicissitudes, humanity will move on. We need to learn from comparing long history cycles and see the change in the things through the subtle and minute. We need to foster new opportunities amidst crisis, open up new horizons on a shifting landscape, and pull great strength to go through difficulties and challenges.
Hundreds of migrant workers in Taiwan demonstrated in downtown Taipei for better conditions and the freedom to change employers. According to the Ministry of Labor Statistics, there are more than 680,000 migrant workers in the country, all of whom come from Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand. About 30% are domestic workers who are not protected under the island's labor laws. Workers' rights activists say excluding domestic workers from labor laws is discriminatory and subjects them to abuse from employers. The protesters called on the government to abolish paragraph 4, Article 53 of the Employment Act, which prohibits them from changing jobs in Taiwan, except in extreme circumstances.
Personally, I was abused by my boss before I even thought I was in that abusive situation. I need to endure it because of the Taiwan law. We're not allowed to transfer that quickly. The employer has a voice, but we as a worker, we don't have it. I think the Taiwan government now needs to change the law and see how bad the situation is for the overseas Filipino workers here in Taiwan. The largest group of migrant workers here in Taiwan are the caregivers, or domestic workers, which numbers more than 200,000. They are mostly from Indonesia. This group of migrant workers, the biggest problem here is that they are not protected under the Taiwan basic labor laws. Their wages, working hours, and leave or rest days are not protected.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. Palestinians protested in occupied East Jerusalem over a new eviction in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. A group of Palestinians stood in the roof of a house in the neighborhood that has seen repeated forced evictions by the Zionist regime and vowed to defend the family facing the loss of their home. Scores of Israeli police in riot gear surrounded the property from early on Monday, while roads were sealed off around the area. As the afternoon stretched on, Israeli forces backed by bulldozers and special units demolished a plant and nursery belonging to the family. At least 2 Palestinians were arrested as Israeli soldiers assaulted people who had gathered around the house in solidarity with the family. Sheikh Jarrah has become an emblem of the Israeli campaign to forcibly displace Palestinians from East Jerusalem in an internationally condemned practice.
The family has lived in this house for decades, but the occupation government issued a decision against this family to forcibly displace it, under the false claim that they would like to build a school or a kindergarten for children in this location, and the school will be only for settlers. It's a very complicated situation.
The demolition and the evictions of civilians from occupied territory is a violation of international law, as long as it's not for military necessity. In this instance, we are not seeing any military reasons for any evictions and demolitions, and we call on the Israeli government to cease all of these actions as they appear to be a violation of international law. And we're very concerned, and we hope that there is no harm or damage done to them or to their property.
And the Russian military forces operating in Syria at the request of Damascus are supplementing their country's contribution to the Syrian war against terrorism with humanitarian relief to support the families and children of the Syrian soldiers killed on the battlefield. Our correspondent Hisham Wanus has the story.
The humanitarian operations of the Russian military reach all war victims all over Syria. The distribution of 500 food baskets, as well as gifts, presents and school supplies to the families and children of the martyrs of the Syrian Arab Army in the rural area of the coastal province of Latakia, is an example of this humanitarian work. The distribution of aid is carried out by the Russian Coordination Center in cooperation with Syrian authorities to provide assistance to war-affected families throughout Syria, and we plan to carry out 3 such operations in different parts of the country. This year, Russian social movements are also expected to join these efforts. Russian aid reached the families of 110 martyrs and 250 wounded soldiers of the Syrian armed forces, who are part of the population of the village of Chamilla in the Latakian countryside. Locals of this area, as well as the inhabitants of other villages in different Syrian provinces receiving assistance from Russia, are grateful that just as they helped their national army to overcome terrorism, the Russian military are now helping to strengthen the Syrian people's resistance to the Western economic war. We are grateful for this support from Russian friends, and this is the second time that their humanitarian assistance reaches our village, and we hope that their support will reach all those in need in the country, as this aid contributes to improve the psychological and economic situation of Syrians in the midst of the unjust United States economic blockade. At the same time as this humanitarian action, the Russian military continues its air support to the Syrian Arab Army in its pursuit of the last terrorist remnants of Syrian soil, as well as its efforts to restore security in the de-escalation zone in the northwestern Syrian province of Idlib, through joint patrols with the Turkish military police in compliance with the ceasefire agreement signed in 2019 between Moscow and Ankara in the Russian city of Sochi.
Hisham Wanus, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
Now we move on to other topics. Paraguay is experiencing record high temperatures with people seeking ways to cool off. Splashing in pools, small waterfalls and streams, Paraguayans sought refuge from extended heat wave over the weekend. Maximum temperatures are ranging between 40 and 42 degrees Celsius in areas of the Paraguayan Chaco, a semi-arid region of the country. Historical records have been broken as the heat also affects neighboring Argentina. Meanwhile, on Sundays, Brazil's southernmost Rio Grande do Sul state registered temperature records of over 40 degrees Celsius, according to the Brazilian Meteorology Institute. Experts said that the high temperatures across much of South America are linked to the La Niña phenomenon, in which an upwelling of cooler water in the Pacific causes changes in weather patterns around the world.
High temperatures are going to continue in our country. In fact, historical records have been broken at some points, after more than 16 years, including very high temperatures. In general, during this weekend, the maximum temperatures have been ranging between 40 and even 42 degrees in some points of the Paraguayan Chaco region, and at regional level. Similar conditions have been recorded in recent days.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.